Reach into space. ABC News live coverage of the Space Shuttle Columbia continues. Now, from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, Frank Reynolds.
And good morning once again. It has been indeed a very good morning for the astronauts of Apollo. I'm going right back because I'm sitting here with an old Apollo veteran. For the astronauts of Columbia, the Space Shuttle, Gene Cernan is with me here, and it's been a very good morning, as I say, because everything has gone well. The initial countdown, of course, was set back 2.5 hours or so, but then when they said 10 o'clock, it turns out that they meant 10 o'clock, and it lifted off at 10:10. Just a very brief delay in the final countdown procedures. And since then, everything has gone well. We're still waiting right now for the signal to be picked up once again from the astronauts as they begin to approach the United States. Here you see where they are. They're over the Pacific now and coming up on the southern coast of Mexico, and they'll be moving in over the United States shortly. So let's go now to where they're tracking them very closely at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, and Steve Bell. Steve?
Thank you, Frank. And as we track the mission as it continues toward the end of its first orbit, what we have is a familiar gremlin that's come back again. We've talked so much about the APUs, the auxiliary power units, the 3 of them that are on board. It was problems with their oil filters and the cleanliness of the oil that caused the first delay a week ago. And as you may recall, astronaut Joe Allen, sitting here with me, was telling us earlier that one of them had heated up a little too much and had to be turned off early. Now it turns out we're having a problem with another of the 3 APUs. Joe, what's exactly happening?
Steve, we have 3 on board, imaginatively named APU 1, 2, and 3. And the third one, Dick Truly shut down a bit early because it was getting too warm. When we went over Australia, we noticed that APU number 1 was not cooling down. Even though it was shut off, it was not cooling down properly. We think maybe some heaters are stuck on, and we've turned off all heaters to that particular APU, and we will anxiously look at what the temperatures of that APU are when the spacecraft is acquired coming over California.
All right, now what does this mean to the mission? Could we at all be in a configuration where they'd have to come down early?
I think not. We have 3. We can lose one and still be comfortable. We're not in danger of losing this one, but I wish we had heard the last of the APUs. Apparently we're going to hear a bit more about them as we look at the possible heater problem.
Is it accurate then that if they can't correct this problem, they could shut this one down for the re-entry and simply come down with the use of 2 APUs?
Yes, it is shut down now. We just won't start it for the re-entry if for some reason we think it is not operating properly.
And this is not the one that overheated initially.
That's correct.
All right. Now, this is what we've been talking about all along by redundancy. In effect, couldn't you lose 2 of the 3 and still have the power to maneuver the rockets that have to get you back into the D-orbit?
That is exactly correct. The philosophy, design philosophy of the Space Shuttle is to be able, is based on we can lose 1 system, 1 of anything, and still operate. In fact, not even be worried. When we lose 2 systems of anything, then we're concerned and think seriously about coming home. That is true of the APUs.
Okay, so as the orbit comes back over the U.S., we will definitely be hearing, I'm sure, ground control here in Houston and the astronauts up in space over the U.S. talking about the problems with the APUs and how to deal with it. And our coverage of Space Shuttle Columbia continues in just a moment. Continuing our coverage of the ABC News coverage of the launch into space of the Space Shuttle Columbia. In fact, we really haven't stopped to emphasize the fact that the major accomplishment of this mission has already happened. They have sent a used spacecraft back into space successfully. It's now in what we know, as much as we know now, to be a perfect orbit for the 5-day mission. All appears to be going well except with those APUs, and we'll keep in touch with that. It does not appear that an APU problem would shorten the mission at all at this time. One of the things coming up at 4 hours into the mission is the activation of ASTA-1. Now, that's the package of scientific experiments that are in the payload cargo area of the spacecraft. The cargo bay doors to be opened very soon now, and once that's happened, then they can activate the experiments. And one of the first experiments is called a feature identification file. It's one of those experiments that can't be done from ground level. It can't be done with the same effectiveness as it can from space at even the height of an airplane. So the ground effectiveness, or I should say the feature identification file, is one of the first experiments that's going to be activated. Lynn Scher has a report on how it's operating, and it will be one of 5 experiments, the 5th experiment in the payload bay, and here is Lynn Scher's report.
File, feature identification and location experiment. This is a technology demonstration located in the shuttle's cargo bay. FILE is meant to develop a smart sensor, a remote device that knows the difference between various features, clouds and snow, or vegetation and ocean, for instance. It's a device that will be used in satellites of the future to eliminate data that's not needed.
Well, a practical application for this is really to control sensors in orbit so that we minimize the amount of data that we have to process and analyze on the ground.
FILE uses a cone-shaped sensor triggered by the sun to activate 2 television cameras, 1 film camera, a tape recorder, and an electronics unit that will make decisions.
It will collect 32 scenes of any one cover class, like land, and when it has 32 land scenes stored, it will no longer collect any more land scenes. It will move on and collect vegetation. And in that way, for instance, if we had something like an aerial camera on board the shuttle, it would only turn that camera on, for instance, when it was over land that was not covered by clouds, if we have this kind of a sensor on board.
Back at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, this is Steve Bell with ABC's continuing coverage of the launch of the Space Shuttle Columbia. And the Columbia is coming back over the United States, just crossing over the coast of California now. And we're going to pick up the voices of the astronauts again. Let's listen.
Roger, they're on 812, and we'd like all 3 APU heater, gas generator, fuel pump switches off.
All right, here we're getting instructions from mission control up to the astronauts, referring to just exactly the problem we've been talking about, the 3 APUs. Joe, what are they doing now?
It sounds as though they're turning off still more heaters. These are different ones on the APUs, and Capcom has asked Dick to go to the back of the vehicle and turn off heater switches there.
Now, when you say the back of the vehicle, you're not talking about the back of the shuttle, the back of
the flight deck. It's a fairly small volume there at the very front end.
That's right. I know from my own simulator experience, you don't have a lot of room in there. But we're talking about a pilot now out of his seat, working, going to a control panel at the back, and being asked to shut down more heaters in an effort to obviously bring down the heat in APU number 1. And
the heaters are normally configured in an automatic mode. That is to say, when the temperature drops too low, they'll come on. The thinking is that even though they're in auto, one or perhaps more might be on all the time. In other words, stuck on.
All right, one of the things that we'd been hoping for on this pass over the U.S. was the first set of television pictures, live television from the spacecraft. Could this APU problem jeopardize that by diverting the attention?
It's possible, but the procedure is to turn them off, and then Joe and Dick will go about business as usual. The problem is one for mission control to worry about more than the astronauts on board. Yes.
All right. Well, what we hope to see is the first live transmission from the Space Shuttle Columbia, and it will be television pictures from onboard cameras that are going to be activated, and hopefully will be activated on this first pass over the United States. Steve Shepard has filed a report on exactly how those cameras are set up and what the plans are for the cameras during the mission, and that's going to be providing us with our most exciting moments during the next 5 days. Steve Shepard.
The Space Shuttle Columbia flies into orbit with enough television cameras on board to outfit a good-sized TV station. There will be 8 cameras in all, 2 in the crew cabin, 4 in the cargo bay, and 2 attached to the remote manipulator arm. The 2 cabin cameras are portable color models. They are kept in stowage during liftoff and are unpacked for use by the crew only when the Columbia achieves orbit. Astronauts Truly and Engle will use those cameras to give ground controllers a good view of exactly what's happening on the flight deck. The 4 cargo bay cameras are located in fixed positions near the corners of the rectangularly shaped cargo area. 3 of those cameras are black and white and will be used primarily to show the operation of the huge cargo bay doors and the movement of the remote manipulator arm. The 4th camera will shoot color pictures, and in addition to monitoring the cargo area, will be the primary camera for showing ordinary viewers back on Earth what's taking place on the shuttle mission. The 2 black and white cameras on the manipulator arm will be used by the astronauts to guide the arm's operation. 1 camera at the elbow will monitor the arm's lower segment, while the other camera at the wrist will act like a pair of extended remote-controlled eyes. With it, Truly and Engle can actually look back at themselves from outside the Columbia, or even get a picture of the underside of the spacecraft. Together, the 8 cameras on board Columbia will not only help the crew perform its mission more efficiently, they will also give scientists at NASA and ordinary laymen back on Earth the best pictures yet of man working in space.
Back at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Steve Bell with ABC's continuing coverage of the Columbia Space Shuttle. Astronaut Joe Allen sitting here with me. You're continuing to monitor the transmissions
Columbia,
between
Houston,
mission
on
control
camera
and the
Delta. We're going
astronauts.
to try and command it on right
Let's
now, see
listen
if we
in
can get
right
it
now.
working for you.
Okay, mighty fine, Dad. I can't swing Alpha around far enough to see it.
Roger, we're going to give it a whirl and we'll let you know.
What they're talking about, of course, those 3 APUs on board, the auxiliary power units, one of which is acting up.
Roger, copy.
I'm sorry, they're now talking about problems with the color camera system. So we have a second problem that we know of. However, this one has little or nothing to do with the actual flight. It simply has to do with our ability to observe the flight and with
Columbia,
the
Houston, we'd like you to
things that they
configure for
hope
the
to pick
verniers
up with the
as soon as you
television
get to it.
cameras. Any experiments, Joe, directly involved with the television cameras?
Not really, Steve. The experiments are instruments, not cameras. It is true, though, that the TV cameras give the engineers a lot of information, added information, in addition to giving us some pretty good views of planet Earth and also deep space. We have a number of cameras on board, and we heard there Joe tell us in mission control that he was having trouble getting one of the cameras to put a picture on a monitor. They have a tiny little TV studio there, not unlike ours here, and can monitor what the camera is sending down to Earth.
Do we know yet whether the payload bay doors?
They are not open. There's no massive hurry to get along with that. They're trying to get the cameras set up.
But that has dropped now behind schedule.
I'm not sure they're behind schedule. They're just trying to configure the cameras, and the schedule calls for a number of minutes allotted to getting the doors open.
Roger, Columbia, we see the verniers on now.
Frank
We'd like
Reynolds and Gene Cernan
page
down at the
1-6.
Cape, listening in on all of this. Gentlemen, any observations on these 2 problems we seem to have developing now?
Well, I think, Steve, that Joe has probably put it right, that they're not really, well, the APU could be a problem, of course, but as far as the television transmission and the opening of the payload doors, they haven't really started to do that yet, as far as the cargo doors are concerned. Is that right? They may have a problem with the television because, as Joe Engle reported, he couldn't get a picture on his monitor there. But didn't Houston say that they were going to try to activate that from the ground? Of course, the television can be important too, Gene. I mean, it would be nice to know about the tiles too, wouldn't it?
Well, the tiles and they want to monitor the doors on television because that's a very critical. The doors are still a very critical item, and we want to get some very good engineering data from those televisions. And Joe,
we're going to get some. Here we're going to get some video now, I believe, some pictures.
There we go, Joe.
This is being shown at Mission Control in Houston. Joe, do you have any idea what this is?
It looks like a camera looking back at us.
It does.
Let me think about this for a moment.
In Columbia, Houston, we have no joy on turning Delta on either. We did turn on one of the aft ones, and it looks good, and we're going to give you the cameras for your payload bay door work.
There it is, the ground head.
Well, we'll hopefully get it working here for
The ground could not get one of the cameras working that Joe couldn't get working also, but they did turn on another one, and this appears to be an F camera looking forward.
And Gene,
reporting that mission control was only able to command the aft camera on board. Therefore, we will have no color television of the payload bay door operations.
Does that mean now no color television for the mission?
I'm not certain. I think there are numbers of things to try.
Well, that would be pretty in color.
In fact, that looks like color TV to me.
It sure does.
Being returned right now.
Control Houston, 1 hour and 41 minutes mission elapsed time.
Still haven't opened the doors, have
No, I don't believe they have at this point in time.
They have not opened the doors yet, Gene. The lights we see...
Columbia, Houston, be advised, we have camera A on the flag and is looking great.
Okay, we have one of the color cameras on right now. The light we see is from artificial lighting in the cargo bay.
Houston PLT, be advised, I'm using the outlight stuff, but boy, it is so dark that you barely pick out the targets, and it's going to take me a little while.
Roger, we copy.
What we're seeing is inside the cargo bay.
Yes, it's inside. It's
That report from Columbia, the field light markings are difficult to see. Shuttle Control Houston, 1 hour and 42 minutes mission elapsed time. We have approximately 4 minutes and 20 seconds remaining on the stateside pass.
It's very possible we won't. They do want to get these cameras rigged up. As I said, they're not critical to open the doors, but the data that we get from those cameras, visual data that we get from those cameras is critical, particularly if they have a problem with one of the latches.
And we still have 4 minutes or so before we lose signal. Now, apparently not. I thought maybe we were going to keep the picture there for a while.
Houston, I have a flight note for you.
They still have it up there in the... now it's gone now.
Okay, go ahead,
from Houston, too.
Roger, on that panel 812...
Well, let's listen to them.
They're just reconfiguring some systems here now, Frank, that are concerned with the APU. You know, I don't visualize any problems of any kind here at all. I mean, there's a little hesitancy on a parts of some, but I really feel that this is just putting things in an orderly fashion in order to proceed with the opening of the doors.
They're over North Carolina, approximately over North Carolina, right about now. And maybe I should repeat that we did mention earlier some of the cities in the United States where you might be able to see the spacecraft if you happen to be in the right place at the right time. Miami, Fort Worth, Austin, Texas. Let's see, I've forgotten a few of the others, but along
Houston,
that
certainly.
General line, Houston, yes. And you say, Gene, the best time would be at approximately sunset.
Well, when you just go into darkness on Earth and something above you, 130 or 40 miles, is still in sunlight, and you can see the reflection of, say, the shuttle. Oh, in Houston, for instance, it might be 6:30, somewhere in that period of time might very well be the best time to see the
That'll be in
reflection.
approximately, they'll be in about the 4th orbit around.
That's
right?
about what it looks like to me. But when you're in darkness, it's surrounded by darkness, and yet there's sunshine. And you've seen airplanes up there when the sun is going down and they're still in sunlight. Well, this is even on a grander scope because this shuttle is much higher.
Okay, well, we'll be back to get that television, if we do get it indeed, and our coverage of Space Shuttle Columbia will continue in a moment. All right, 1 hour and 46 minutes ago, Columbia, the Space Shuttle, lifted off from the now empty pad here at 39A at the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral, and is now well on its way. It's already completed its first orbit, passed over the United States, but we've lost the signal now because they've gone out of range of the various tracking stations. The television didn't quite work on the first pass around, and they didn't open the cargo bay doors, but all that is expected to take place. And of course, we'll be very closely monitoring this situation throughout the entire mission, which will not end until next Tuesday at 2:10. Is it 2:10 Eastern Time? Yes, I believe. 2:20 Eastern Time when it comes down in California. So, the mission is going very well. Columbia, the space shuttle, back in space for the second time with its crew of Joe Engle and Richard Truly. And now I want to thank all those who've helped us here, only a few by name, Steve Bell and Joe Allen and Hugh Downs at Mission Control in Houston. Of course, my colleague Gene Cernan here with me at the Kennedy Space Center, and also Jules Bergman, who's been out there at our forward observation point, enjoying this launch and making a great contribution to our broadcast. So we'll have more on all this on ABC's World News tonight. But now, this is Frank Reynolds at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
This has been Reach into Space, ABC News live coverage of the launch of the Space Shuttle Columbia. This has been a special events presentation of ABC News.